All right, it looks like most people are here, so I'm going to go ahead and get things started. Thank you guys so much for joining the call this afternoon. I wanted to first introduce Catherine McGanity. She's class of 2010, and she's going to be hosting this alumni demonstration this afternoon. She will be showing us how to make a cherry devil's food cake with a cherry chocolate glaze on top. And then just a few housekeeping notes for everyone. Please keep your microphone on mute so that everyone can hear Catherine clearly through the call. You're welcome to have your video on or off, whichever you're more comfortable with. But please note that this video is being recorded, or this demo is being recorded. So if you do not wish to be recorded, make sure that camera is switched to off. We also recommend utilizing the speaker view function located in the top right-hand corner of your screen so that when Catherine is speaking, she will be the largest video for you and you can see what she's doing in more detail. Please feel free to use the chat function to ask any questions you have for Catherine during the demo, and we'll do our best to read them out. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Catherine McGanity. I'll pass it over to Catherine now to share a bit more about herself and to get this cake demo started.
Hey everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to part, I guess, of the digital reunion weekend activities. We're going to be making a cherry devil's food cake with a cherry chocolate glaze. The best part about this cake is that if you choose not to do the glaze, it tastes just as good with vanilla ice cream, but we're going to push ourselves today and do a little bit of glaze. You may have noticed that there are two different screens for me. One is the screen here where you can see the majority of the work that I do. However, we do have a second screen set up. It's this little iPad, and you'll be able to see what my hands are doing. I'll be able to show you the inside of different bowls, and then that way you can get a close-up view of what different consistencies are when I'm using my blender, and also get an idea of technique. If you have a question about the origin of this recipe, it is based off of the devil's food cake recipe and the bittersweet glaze recipe from the Joy of Cooking cookbook. Otherwise, though, adding a little bit of cherry is not half bad. Hopefully you were able to notice in the emails of the ingredients that different items were put into certain groups. I've gone ahead and pre-combined some of these groups. However, for certain techniques, I've kept the ingredients apart so I can really show you how to make this properly, or at least to the best of our abilities. And then we can combine it for deliciousness. So, first things first, we're gonna go ahead and get started with the group 5 cherries that are the frozen cherries. Go ahead and get those out of the freezer. And with some handy dandy scissors, go ahead and cut that back completely open. I am using a good 1 liter, 1 quart Pyrex pitcher, and you're simply going to go ahead and start the thawing process for these guys. It is approximately 1 quart, maybe 3 cups in dimension, but we want to go ahead and give these enough time to thaw a bit, really relax, because we will be putting these in the microwave later, and we don't want to shock them with that heat. So we're going to go ahead and get that started for prep work. Secondly, there are going to be some moments in this demo where if you have a young sous chef who wants to get involved, they can certainly get involved during those times. Otherwise, little hands may not be the best for operating such devices as a hand mixer. However, if they want to help with this part, I certainly suggest they grab a nice pair of handy scissors. What we're going to do is go ahead and cut the parchment for the lining of the small cake pan. I believe I had a 9-inch round as the suggested cake pan. Right now, I'm using a 6-inch round because I have a lot of really nice neighbors who have been kind enough to bring by banana bread and things like that. And so it's nice to reciprocate and give them something sweet to nibble on for the weekend. But first, since we're working with a round pan, it's going to be hard to put something that's square into something that's round. So I'm going to show you a little parchment hack that helps you line that pan so that way it doesn't really get sticky, and then you don't have to worry about the butter and the flouring prep process. So first, you're going to take your parchment paper and fold it in half, and then fold it again to create a point. Now, the fold that you just created is going to be on, let's see if I can make this a bit more visible. The fold that you've just created is going to be on your right-hand side. The existing fold, which is the two folds, is going to be on the top. And you're going to alternate which fold you're going to do when creating the round cut. So we just folded from right to left. Now we're going to go from top to right corner, create a nice pinch and crease. Then with your right hand, you're going to fold up to the top, pinch and crease. And then again from top to right, fold down, pinch, and try to make a good crease there. Then you're going to take your round and you're going to find the midpoint of you're going to find the center of the round, and you're going to hold your thumb right on the edge. So you can then take your pair of scissors, I'll do this left-handed so you can see, and then you're going to cut right above your thumb, very safely, very slowly. Unfortunately, I am right-hand dominant, so I'll have to do this with my right hand. Thankfully, I made a little notch so I know where I need to cut. Go ahead and snip that top off and unfurl. And this is going to give you a really nice round piece of paper that is going to fit in the bottom of your pan. Now, it's never really going to fit absolutely perfectly, and we don't want it to, because the second part of lining this is going to come from creating a collar. And you'll do this by taking your one large parchment sheet, folding it in half hot dog wise, pinch and crease, then folding the second piece of parchment down, pinch and crease. And then you're going to take the two sheets, you're going to slip one into the other, and then I found if you put it crease side down, you're going to go ahead and bring the collar in. So then you've got a concentric circle. You'll want to make sure that when you create the collar, you don't have one piece of parchment that is the outside and it only eats the other. You want to make sure that it's almost like the live free or die snake, or yeah, no, the free or die snake is cut up. That's not quite right. But you want it to have it kind of like the snake that's eating its own tail. So then that way there's no one piece that is on its own, and then that just fits right inside, and it go ahead and put it so it fits inside of the overlap of that bottom piece, and this is ready for later. This is going to be great. So we've gone ahead, we've prepped our cherries, we've prepped our pan, now we need to prep our oven. We're going to go ahead and set that to 350. And make sure once you set it, you haven't left anything in the oven accidentally. Sometimes I like to leave bread in the oven so that way I just have to warm it up the next morning for breakfast. And burnt bread is not fun when you forget it. So let's make sure we don't do that. So now we're going to start combining ingredients. Go ahead and pull out that one large bowl that I suggested you get. And make sure that if you have a lot of sliding space or you don't want it to move around a whole lot, feel free to take an oven mat and just plop that down, and then it becomes a bit more sturdy and rigid. Because we're going to be using a hand mixer today and not a bowl mixer, I like being able to spin it around a bit. So let's make sure we go ahead and stick with that. I am using a compact Cuisinart hand mixer. A lot of the times when you watch cooking shows, they're a whole lot of fun, but they're all using those stand-up mixers, and not all of us have kitchen space for those items. So being able to rely just on a hand blender is really, really convenient for this kind of activity. You will want to use the mixing paddles. You don't want to use the whisk, and you don't want to use the bread. We will not be kneading gluten today. We want to keep this nice and moist and not create a chocolate cherry bread, though that does sound delicious. So go ahead and plug in your devices. So first, we're going to start with group 4. I know I put these in a specific numerical order, thinking that was the way we would combine them. It turns out this is a much easier way of combining and slowly adding. So we may not be going in group order, but we will be sticking to groups as they are used. So we're going to start with group 4. And group 4 has 2 eggs, 1 stick of butter, and 1 cup of sugar. What I really like about this recipe is that it is not temperature dependent. When you do something like French pastry dough, you want butter to be cold. You want dough to be cold. And there's a really good reason for that, because you're doing lamination. But for this, there's no fuss. If it's a little warm, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Just go ahead, stick your whole stick of butter into that pan at room temperature. It's gonna be great. The main reason we want to start with the butter is because we want to incorporate air. So with your hand mixer and your 1 stick of butter, first put the mixer into the butter. Don't even turn it on yet. We're going to go low and slow for a little while, just to make sure we're incorporating more air. It's also important to note before we even start, what's the color of the butter? The color is going to lighten as we incorporate air. We're also going to put sugar in that. Again, you want to notice what the color is, because as it gets lighter in color, then you know, okay, I've done the work that needs to get done. We can move on to the next step. So I'm setting it to 1. And so it's going kind of chunky to begin with, and that's because we've got only 1 stick and 1 large bowl, and that's okay. It's going to be low and slow. So right now I've got some butter that's stuck to my whisk blades. That's okay, or my blending blades, that's okay. Because now we're gonna go ahead and take the 1 cup of sugar and put it directly into the bowl. Again, note the color of your butter. Mine is a nice sort of light daffodil yellow color. And as we mix that sugar in, it's going to lighten up. You'll want to set this to about a 1 or 2 still. The main reason I have a really big bowl is sometimes because we're using so little ingredients, they can fly around a lot with this. So by starting with a big bowl, you're able to keep your mess to a minimum. we're using a hand mixer, make sure to go ahead and keep turning your bowl a little bit to make sure all the ingredients are getting incorporated. So right now, what we've got are a couple stubborn pieces of butter, but that's okay. What you're looking for is a pretty good mix. We want to cream it up a little bit until it's almost smooth, but not a perfectly smooth consistency. We don't need it to be perfect because we'll be adding eggs in later, and that's really going to help with the liquid state. Excellent. So now we're going to go ahead, one egg at a time, incorporate the eggs. A lot of different cooking shows will say, oh, you go ahead and you tap it on the edge of the bowl, crack it in. I have found over time that actually creates a whole lot more cracks in the shell, which means there's a lot more likelihood of shell getting into your batter. So I like going ahead and tapping it on a flat surface. If you don't like having the mess of a little bit of egg white on a flat surface, go ahead, easy peasy, get a paper towel, put it on the flat surface, and then crack it. And then just throw away the paper towel. Easy. So we're gonna go ahead, and also you've got that paper towel to like wipe your fingers on in case you have like a little bit of residual. Again, we're gonna take our mix and that one egg that's now already gotten covered. Here we go. No, it's just gonna slide around. Sorry, you won't be able to see it. Go ahead and incorporate that first egg in completely. All right, good deal. What's really great about this process is you started with a yellow stick of butter or a whitish stick of butter. You've added sugar. It's become lighter in color. You've added a yolk. It should be just about back to the original butter color. So this is what mine looks like. I know it's not much. It's not really thick and creamy, but that's not what it's supposed to be right now. That's what the buttermilk's job is later. So again, take your paper towel, just go ahead, one good tap, crack that egg, add it to your mix, make sure there's no shell. I once made this and looked and thought I got shell inside. It turns out, with some eggs, there are blood clots in the yolk. If it's brown, it means it's fresh. It's a good thing. Okay, oven's done. All right, again, we're going to fully incorporate that second egg. At this stage, it's really good to double check and make sure you've really incorporated all of the butter. Sometimes in that first blending part, it gets kind of granular and grainy, and there can be stubborn clumps of butter that just do not want to be mixed in. That's okay. At this point though, you should make sure all the butter is included. All right. Go ahead and turn up the speed a little bit. We're going to make it a little fluffy. Again, we're incorporating air. Sometimes when you think about cakes and when they're nice and fluffy and really moist, you don't think about, oh, they had to add air to that. A lot of the times you think, oh, it must be really wet when you add it. All right, we're going to go ahead, tap, get these out, tap them on the side of the bowl, and get this out of the way for now. So, I had requested you all have a second bowl available, like the medium-sized bowl. And in there. This is for group 1. I've already combined the sugar and the cocoa powder together. You'll want to go ahead and put those in this medium bowl. To that, we're going to add half a cup of buttermilk and 1/8 of a cup of sour cream. For those of you who might want to know the consistency of the butter, sugar, egg mix, it looks a lot like this. Let's see. So it's still very, very thick, which is perfectly all right. So we're going to take the combination of cocoa and sugar. Into that, we're going to be adding, let's see, yep, the buttermilk and the sour cream, which I had pre-measured. And again, we're just going to combine these into this side bowl. You might be wondering, Catherine, why aren't we just adding this to the eggs? One reason really is because we want to make sure this cocoa mixture is properly incorporated with the liquid before we add it to the eggs. I've tried doing this all straight into the eggs. It creates a very dense cake. If you want dense, go for it. If you want a really dense cake, rather than putting the eggs in at room temperature, you can microwave them and then add the sugar. That's very similar to the beginnings of making a brownie. Brownies call for melted butter. But I'm not going for a really dense mixture. I'm going for a nice sort of fluffy devil's food cake. Right, we're gonna go ahead and mix this all in. And if you have a small sous chef who wants to taste test this, this has no raw egg. So they can make sure that the chocolate is not poisoned. And feel free, to have a little sip. You want to have almost an icing-like consistency. We whisk this together, making sure it's all fully incorporated. If you need to do a taste test, now is the time to do it. And then we're just going to go ahead and use the spatula to put the cocoa into the eggs. One really great trick I learned, especially with spatulas that have sort of this curved edge, instead of putting it with the curved side facing outward, use it with the curved side facing towards the bowl. It actually is a lot more effective because it's forcing air between your batter and the bowl, and it just comes out so much faster. If you want to be slow and as you go, that's fine. Do it however you want. It works. I've just found this method to be helpful. And it's a good technique to have if you find yourself having a really big bowl and very little space to just sort of scoop and go. So we're gonna get our mixer again. Stripped off the milk. Plug them in. And we're going to mix to incorporate, but we're not gonna mix too much. We don't wanna get excess air in this. We just wanna make sure it's all blended together. If you wanted to do this by hand with a spatula, that works too. You're good. So on a 1 or a 2 setting, just go around until you can make sure that the mixture is uniform in color. And you're done. Shake. This aside. Now, at this point, you have something akin to a flourless chocolate cake mix. However, we're not making that today. We're making cherry devil fruit cake. So we've got our G4 mix in. We've just put in our G1. Now it's going to get a little bit technical. We have one mixture of the flour, and then we have a second mixture of the buttermilk, the vanilla extract, and the sour cream. I have not put my vanilla extract in yet. The primary reason for that is because I don't know how the vanilla will react to the buttermilk overnight in my fridge, and I figured let's be on the safe side. So make sure you're adding just 1 teaspoon of that vanilla. And you can use your chocolate whisk again. So that works. I like having one tall container in the kitchen while I bake. Otherwise, I have a nasty habit of putting down a used utensil on the counter, and then I find these streaks of batter in weird places. And that may be fun when you're an adult, and maybe especially fun when you're a kid, but it's not fun to clean up. So we've got the group 2, which is the flour, the baking soda, and salt. I believe it's salt. And then we have group 2, and then group 3 is the buttermilk that we just put the vanilla in, and it's off to the side. This is an interesting procedure. We're going to alternate between the flour and the buttermilk as it goes into the chocolate. The primary reason for this is we want to fully mix and incorporate, but we don't want to work the cake flour's gluten. Again, we're not making bread here. If we wanted to make bread, we could use an all-purpose flour with some extra yeast. You could use whole wheat all-purpose flour. If you can't find cake flour and you only have all-purpose, regular bleached white all-purpose flour, that's fine. You just want to make sure you don't over-mix it to work that gluten. If you find you only have whole wheat all-purpose flour and buckwheat flour, if you combine those to a 1-to-1 ratio, it should work because there's a lot of gluten in the whole wheat flour, but there's no gluten in that buckwheat. So it should be able to mix out. It'll give you a much more nuttier flavor, but you still have flour to work with. So we're going to start again, putting our blades into, actually, we're not going to do that first. First, before we even start the alternating, remember those cherries we had set out to the side? Right now, you want to pick those up, look those over. Some of them are going to look like they still have frost on them. Others are going to be sort of glistening in color. If you want to have a fun moment with your kid, have them blow on the cherries and it'll have fog blow back up in their faces. It's kind of fun. We're going to go ahead and put this in the microwave for 1.5 minutes. Again, making sure this is a microwave safe container. And this is from group 5. Only the cherries, not the jam. Again, for 1.5 minutes. All right. Again, we're going to fit our hand blender with our whisk parts. And you don't have to take them out every single time like I do. That's just a habit that I have from when I was baking at Scratch Kitchen in San Antonio, Texas. We would have a lot of different batters at once. And what was a whole lot easier was just to keep your blender in your hand, but just switch out blades. And so whenever I'm done mixing something, I just have a habit of taking them out. And then I have to put them back in. And that's okay. All right. So we're going to alternate between this flour, which I have in this white container, which hopefully you can see pretty well, and the buttermilk, which I have in this small container. It's a little bit brown, but not too brown. You'll see we're going to alternate them, starting with the flour, buttermilk, ending with the flour. You don't have to be precise about how much flour or how much buttermilk you put in each round. You do have to make sure that you alternate. So, with our batter mixture, currently looking pretty good. Looking like that, nice and brown. We're gonna go ahead and shake in about 1/3 of that flour on top. This was sifted before I put it in the container. So if you are adding this directly without having first sifted it, this is the time that you would need to sift it in order to incorporate. Again, we don't have to do this very quickly, low and slow. What matters is that it's fully incorporated. What I typically do when I add a solid to a liquid, like a flour, you start on the outside of the bowl and work in. When you add a liquid to a liquid, you start from the middle of the bowl and you work out. Again, make sure to rotate that bowl underneath you to make sure it's fully incorporated. Making sure not to overmix, but that it is still a smooth mixture. Then you're going to take the buttermilk, about half, pour it into the middle. There we go. Again, we've added a liquid to a liquid. So start from the middle and work to the outside edge. What's really nice about adding different colored items to your chocolate base is you have a really good sense of when it is incorporated, because the colors no longer look like streaks. They really start to look like it's just a lighter tone. Start in the middle and work your way to the outside. And with this buttermilk mix, it should be pretty easy to tell when it has been mixed in, because those buttermilk streaks are really easy to spot. All right. Now, if you have a sous chef, you'll need to remind them there are eggs in the big bowl. And even if they want to go ahead and try that, unfortunately, it's a little too late. However, what they can try are the nope, these aren't strawberries. These are cherries. They can try the cherries. Right now, they still feel pretty cold after only 1.5 minutes. So if they want to pop one in their mouth, feel free to do so. I love these cherries. They're so good. You're going to take a large fork at this point, and then we're going to start piercing the cherries. The primary reason we're only piercing them now instead of when we first put them in is because when we first put them in, they were frozen. and you'd have to basically go a bit psycho and stabbing them. Here, they've thawed enough that we can start sort of poking holes in the majority of them to really loosen up the exit for the liquid inside the cherries. A lot of the times when you add fruit to a cake mix, it can be wonderful or it can be awful. And the primary reason for that is whether or not you've accounted for the amount of liquid in the fruit. If you have sort of dried fruit that you're incorporating into a fruit cake, you don't have a problem with that because it's already been dehydrated and candied. There's very, very little water content in that kind of fruit. However, when you're working with frozen fruit that you're then thawing and then incorporating, that's a lot of liquid that's been trapped not only in the freezing process, but also when you've taken them out, you can get a lot of condensation on your frozen fruit. So by going ahead and puncturing them now, one, it's easier to do. Two, if you want a snack, pop one in your mouth. Nobody's going to judge you for having more vitamins and minerals from fruit in your life. And if your sous chef wants to try some, let him try. All right, I think I got a majority of these cherries pierced. I feel happy with that. And we are going to go ahead. Go ahead and put this back in the microwave for 2 minutes. So we last did the buttermilk, back to the flour. We're putting in about 1/3 of the mix again. And again, we're starting from the outside, working in because we've added a solid, the flour, to a liquid, the batter. One of the other reasons why I like starting from the outside and working in is because sometimes when you start from the middle, especially with solids, you can get these really weird clumps of flour that just magically appear in the bowl when you're pouring it out. And it's because it's adhered to the side of the bowl, and that has created a barrier where the liquid of the batter can't get through. So by starting from the outside and then going to the middle, you're preventing that from happening. All right, put the flour in, the last of the buttermilk. You've got that spatula on hand, remember? The cup side facing outwards. Go ahead and just scrape those edges down. You want to make sure we get as much of that buttermilk in there, because this is one of the major components for keeping the cake moist. The buttermilk instead of whole milk, you can use whole milk, but if you use whole milk, definitely add the sour cream. If you find you have no milk, no buttermilk, no sour cream, use plain yogurt, not Greek, just plain yogurt. It'll still do the trick. Again, leave the yogurt on the counter to warm it up a bit before you add it. Starting from the middle, going out. All right, nicely mixed. This is also a really good time to go ahead and take that spatula and scrape down the sides of the bowl. Let me rinse this off real quick. I got excited because we're making chocolate cherry devils. Possibly one of my favorite things to make. Still it is now. Go ahead and make sure you're scraping the side of the bowl. Again, you can rotate that bowl around so that you don't have to try to figure out what the right angle is as you rotate your hand. Just stay at one angle, move the bowl to you. That is good. And next. Handle side up. So the cherries are done. We're gonna let this batter mixer wait a little bit. I know there's one more flour. We're holding on off on that for a reason. So we're gonna take these fabulous cherries out. If you have a nice countertop, say made of granite or corian, remember this is a really hot surface. You don't want to crack this if you're doing this on a cold day. Make sure to set your oven pad down beforehand. Now, you may have noticed in the tools kit that I asked you for a funnel. Might have felt kind of weird. Don't know why she needs a funnel. This is why. You're gonna go ahead and you're gonna take your cherries and with your funnel inside of this, well, I've got this really nice handy, it's a 2-cup measure. We're gonna go ahead and pour as much of the cherry juice into that funnel as we can. And because of the cherry size, we know they're pretty safe and they will not be falling into the juice. If you have a spatula to help get the cherries out and into that funnel, that's fine. I have had too many experiences in the summer of trying to drink the last bit of that really nice ice soda and then having all the ice fall into my face. This is a good setup to prevent that from happening in a baking scenario. Again, this is a hot surface, so take an oven pad and just set that off to the side. And then take your clean spatula and kind of press down on those cherries a little bit. So in that way, you can really get, you can see my apron, can't see what I'm doing. So you can really get that cherry juice out. Now, some of you may be thinking, this is witchcraft. How is she pressing down on those cherries and it's not going down into the funnel and blocking the funnel? What you can use is, well, you can use something like a coffee filter. My funnel actually comes with a little separator that prevents the material from going too far down. Sometimes you can just hold a fork underneath the cherries, but that can be kind of cumbersome. I don't quite know the technique for that. You're gonna take the cherries that you've just drained, put them back into your Pyrex. We are done with our funnel, so we're just gonna pop that into the sink so it doesn't make a mess anywhere else. And we've been able to get a full half cup of cherry juice from this. If you don't have a full half cup, that's okay. Add a little bit of water until you have about half a cup. If you have pomegranate juice happening to lie around, that's also another great way to go ahead and add this. So from this half cup, you will need to get 3/8 cup. If you don't have an 1/8 of a cup measure, you're gonna use a 1/4 cup measure. You're gonna fill it up once, and then you're gonna fill it halfway the second time. And we're gonna be adding That's for the glaze. What we need to add right now is half of a quarter cup to the batter. So 1/8 of a cup goes in the batter. Go ahead and pour that in. All right. And again, we've added a liquid to a liquid. So we're gonna go ahead and blend that in, starting from the inside, working out. All right, perfect. It really doesn't take much to mix it in. And I will do my best to break that habit of always disconnecting those items. All right, we've got our cherry juice off to the side. And now we're gonna add our last bit of flour to the mix. Go ahead and just tap all that in there. And you're good. Again, mixing to incorporate, start from the outside, work in. And mix this until just, yep, fully incorporated. All right, now it's safe to go ahead and detach this blending. The blenders, tap that out. Put those in the sink so they don't make a mess somewhere else. All right. One of the things I have learned from watching the Great British Baking Show is that Mary Berry is a source of pure genius. A lot of the times when you add fresh fruit to a batter, just plopping them in, they will sink and they'll go to the bottom. Sometimes that can be nice. Like if you're doing a pineapple cake and you put all the pineapples on the bottom and then you put the batter on top and you're not really sure whether or not the pineapples accidentally got out of place, they will sink. So when you invert that cake, all the pineapples will be on the top, which was the bottom of the pan. We don't want that in this case. We want our cherries to basically stay exactly where we put them. So for that, we're going to take a little bit of all-purpose flour, whether it's whole wheat or regular. If you only have cake flour, that's fine. Don't worry about it. I know all-purpose flour is hard to find right now because everybody is babysitting a sourdough for whatever reason. We're going to go ahead and take about 1/8 of a cup to 1/4 cup of flour in a nice shallow bowl. Yes, I know this wasn't on the ingredients, and I'm sorry I'm popping this on you at the last minute. But this is something I just now learned. Well, not now, but recently. And it really helps make this cake fun to present because you cut into it and the cherries stay in place. So as we're adding batter in layers, the cherries will stay in those layers. So instead of having to cut the cake open, put icing on, put the cherries in, put the layer back on top, this does it for you. Saves a whole lot of headache. So go ahead and make sure that you've got this. You can also do this in a dinner plate, or if you have a pie dish, like a glass Pyrex pie dish, that would also work really well in this circumstance. If you have a little baker who wants to help, this is a lot of fun. Rolling these cherries that we've microwaved, that we've set aside a little bit so they can cool off a little bit to the touch. And we are just going to put in a small handful into the flour. And we are going to coat them with flour until they look like this. They don't have to be perfectly coated. You just want a very light coating, but it's really going to make a world of difference. And just, it's so pretty. Like, why? It's so pretty. Just give it a try. Why not? All right, so we've got our pan that already has the collar on. We are not going to pour it directly from the bowl into the pan. I repeat, we're not pouring from the bowl to the pan. That is a dangerous idea. Instead, we're going to take our handy dandy spatula. I use a scoop spatula. And we are going to scoop the batter from the bowl into our pan that's been pre-collared. And you might say, Catherine, why? I can just pour it in. That's true, you can, but it can be a little cumbersome, especially if you're somebody who is in the kitchen on your own. And the last thing you want to do is find batter on the floor. That's never fun for anybody, especially the baker who's put in a lot of effort to making a nice cake. So you're going to want to put enough batter into the collar so it's about 3/8 to 1/4 of an inch full. Go ahead and tap it. If you're worried about whether or not the collar is going to fall, you can take some of the batter, mark it on the inside of the paper, and just use it like a little bit of glue. And that way, you know the collar isn't going to collapse on you as you pour in. We're going to take these fantastically rolled cherries, and you're going to go ahead. I've got about 18 cherries. Go ahead and lay them in whatever design you like. You can have a whole lot of cherries. You can have sparse cherries. They can be in a design of some kind if you really want. They don't have to be though. Just go ahead and put them in for this first layer. And you want them to be pretty uniform, and it doesn't matter how close they are to the collar. If you put one right up against the collar, maybe that's not the best idea, but as the cake expands and the batter moves in the heat, the cherries will be just fine. All right, I've got my first layer of cherries in. I'm just gonna rinse off my fingertip real quick so then that way I can make sure I have good control of my spatula. And again, we're gonna take the spatula and we're gonna scoop the batter into the collar. Now, if you are somebody who believes you can pour, I am not gonna stop you. I will ask why, but I'm not gonna stop you. And typically, in one 9-inch pan, you're going to be able to get about 2 layers of cherries in. So again, we're going to go ahead and fill it up just to the point that the cherries are covered, a little bit extra. And then again, we're going to take our cherries, plop them into our flour mixture, and we're just going to roll them around until they are coated in the flour. In the process of microwaving these cherries, some of them might be just totally blitzed. That's okay. Go ahead, if you have 2 halves of a cherry, just put those halves together, put them in the batter. The great thing about cakes is that at the end of the day, you're gonna eat them. What matters is not whether or not every cherry is perfect. What matters is that they taste good. This is not a cake that we are submitting to a competition. This is a cake we're giving to the people we love during a really difficult time. So we're just gonna go ahead and layer those cherries. And I realized the last time I layered cherries in, I did not show you how far apart I was putting them. So let me see if I can give you a glimpse of that on the iPad. So this is what they look like. Not too close, not too far apart, but still you can see that they are definitely covered in flour. Again, picking up the bowl. And then we are going to scoop in the top layer. One of the great things I have found about this collar is that if it turns out you overfill the pan, the collar, because it's been doubled up like this, is stiff enough to enable the cake to still rise and not completely overflow onto your oven. Lovely. And that is that. So at this point in time, we've got our batter in. A good rule of thumb is literally your thumb. You want to have about a thumb of space between the batter and the top lip of your pan when you don't use a collar. Because we're using a collar, we get a bit more flexibility. All right. You can tap it a little bit just to make sure there are no weird air bubbles. And now we're going to go ahead and put it in our oven for 350, which we started at the very beginning, for about 30 to 45 minutes. Oh, there we go. You want to make sure it's in the middle rack, around center. All right. These cherries. This is done. I have a little extra batter, which I can then use to do another application of this, is little miniature cupcakes. You can go ahead and get a cupcake liner, put them in the cupcake rounds, fill a little bit of each cupcake with the batter, put 1 cherry in per cupcake, especially if it's the mini cupcakes. Put a little bit of batter on top. If you're lazy, you can just fill up the cupcakes, put a cherry on top without the flour covering, and then it'll sink. This there, covering up the cherries that I have left over, and I'm covering up the batter that I have left over, and I'm going to pop these into, don't use your hands, use a paper towel. Wipe that off a bit. And this will just go into my fridge to use a little bit later. for when I make some goodies for my neighbors. All right, so you're probably wondering, Catherine, you've just put a cake into the oven. How are we gonna glaze it? And you're right, that's logical. But that's why we made a different one last night. So we've got this monster from last night. I think it turned out really well. This actually climbed out of the pan and up the collar, and it stayed in the collar the whole time. It took about an hour to bake though, because it kept on going up and the center was jiggly. So you have to be careful about the collar and the timing. But this looks really good. I'm very happy with this. So in terms of the glaze, I believe this is group 6 that I'm working with. We've got 6 ounces of these semi-sweet chocolate morsels. I got mine from Trader Joe's. And I'm using here a 2-cup Pyrex pitcher. We're gonna go ahead and just put those morsels inside the pitcher. Sometimes you will see a piece of chocolate that has denatured. Looks like this. For those of you who've not been checking the pie pad, denatured chocolate looks like this. And we're gonna melt it so it doesn't really affect whether or not it tastes bad. It tastes fine. Sometimes the texture is a bit odd, but because we're melting it, it's not gonna be a problem. And we're gonna go ahead and microwave this for a minute. However, we're gonna stop it at 30 seconds, mix it, and then pop it back in. Oh, this might actually be a good time to take questions if people have questions. 30 seconds, round it off. We're gonna go ahead and pause it right there. Pull out the chocolate. And we're just gonna use our small spatula. If you have a spoon, use a spoon. And your small taste tester can definitely enjoy that spoon after you use it. And we're just gonna mix this chocolate up a bit. It's melting on the edges of the Pyrex. So we want to make sure we mix this chocolate around a bit. And as you mix it, you'll notice it gets more melty. The reason why we are doing this in 30-second increments is because we are not 100% sure about our specific morsels melting rate. If you're using semi-sweet, bittersweet, if you choose to be, a little out there and do milk chocolate, that's fine. But they are all going to melt at different rates because they have different amounts of fat. So it's a good thing at 30 seconds to stop. Just go ahead and check how melty it is and then pop it back in. This is my consistency. It's a little bit melty, but not quite there. I think I saw a question pop up on the iPad. Olivia, if you wouldn't mind reading it out loud.
I was just about, I wanted to wait till you put that back in the microwave, but we have one question just about if you have any go-to baking blogs that you love.
Ooh. Baking blogs.
Or even websites too that you think are really useful.
So I like The Kitchen a lot, KITCHN. They've been helpful. I am spoiled in that I hoard cookbooks. And so if you really want a good cookbook for baking, I really like The Joy of Cooking. Let's see. I also, if you really want to try something different, especially with French baking techniques, I would do Naomi Pomeroy's Tasting Technique. She has these incredible step-by-step instructions at the very back about how to make puff pastry. I don't know how well that's visible with the lighting, but like she has step-by-step guides, which I think are just fantastic. And she, I don't know if she got a James Beard Award or not, but she is great. I love Naomi Pomeroy. Whenever I'm in a bind, I just go on YouTube and I look for Julia Child videos. And there was a little bit difficult to understand her at times. She still is right. She's always right. She's always right. All right. Chocolate is done. Ooh, this is melty goodness. All right. We are gonna, again, mix this up and try to make sure it is a smooth consistency. If you get any like bumps in there and the morsels aren't completely done, like mine aren't, definitely put it in. I would say this needs another 30 seconds. If it's taking a while, I also had a stick of butter in for group 6, which is supposed to be pre-cut in little sort of like 1 centimeter cubes. You can pop a couple in there to help it along. I would not put too many in though. Just give that a nice mix. Great thing about Pyrex is even when you have to be a bit physical with them, they always come with handles. Let's see, baking websites. That is a really good question. I've been on Netflix a bit recently, and they actually have episodes from the British baking show Masterclass on PBS, and those have been very informative. That's actually where I got the cherries rolled in flour trick from. So I'm gonna add mine. Oh, I forgot to press start. All right, so we're going for another 30 seconds. I'm here to try to really mix this up and make sure, yes, this is coming together very nicely. The worst smell in the world is burnt chocolate. Because we're using 6 ounces of chocolate and we're only really heating it up in 30-second increments, there should not be a risk of burning it. But you'll know it's burnt. The moment it starts, you will know. It smells like singed hair, which is an awful smell. All right, so we've got, yes, some creamy, creamy chocolate. To that, we're going to add the 3/8 cup left over of the cherry juice that we had from earlier. And we're gonna mix that in slowly. We might, just reserve a little bit of that. I would say reserve, about a 1/16 of a cup. Because right now this is delicious and yummy looking, though a little bit messy. And I don't want it to be too liquidy at this state because we are going to be adding in these pre-cut cubes of butter one by one until the butter is fully melted. Again, one of the great things about this is all this butter has been sitting out for a little while. It doesn't have to be cold. It's supposed to get melted. So we are just gonna one by one add the butter in and continue to melt it in to our ganache. I sometimes will want to get ahead of myself and put in 2 cubes at a time, but I worry that might be too much. It's probably not too much because this is still a pretty hot mixture. Hence why I have this oven pad underneath it. We're still going to keep stirring and stirring. As we're stirring, if anybody else has questions, feel free to ask Olivia. I'm happy to hear what they have to say.
No more questions yet, but people are jealous of your neighbors who get to eat your goodies.
They're more guinea pigs than they realize. I'm also very lucky to have a guinea pig with me, and he typically is the first taste tester of everything I make. Whether it is buttermilk biscuits or a lemon blitz tort, he is very nice to try out my concoctions.
So my question is, what's your favorite thing to bake? Is it cakes? Is it cookies? Is it bread? What's your favorite?
I'm not gonna lie, I do not like making cookies. Cookies are just like, they're not my thing. I am so glad that there are people out in the world who make cookies for me. I don't like cookies. My favorite thing to make. I got it started on quiches, and I really like making quiches. Quiches are a lot of fun because there's so much potential variety with the quiche. I mean, you could fill it with so many different things, depending on your mood or what's in season. And that crust is a cold water crust. It's not a hot water crust. And it's pretty easy to make. But I think if I were going to pick something that's truly my favorite, it's buttermilk biscuits. Like, they're simple, they're quick, they're easy. You feed them to somebody and they think you're a goddess because they look like they're hard and they're not, but they're delicious. And I've gained 10 pounds because I love biscuits. It's not entirely true, but it's close.
And I did get one more question from your mom and sister about tortillas, making tortillas.
So tortillas are a lot of fun to make. I do not make corn tortillas. I make flour-based tortillas, and I don't use Crisco or butter. I use pork lard. I'm in the process of collecting my bacon drippings so I can make at-home pork lard, so then I can make my flour tortillas. Those are a lot of fun to make. Unfortunately, the only times of year in which I've made them has been in a hot weather condition. And you're standing over a hot skillet while you make them, and it can get pretty, you start to glow pretty quick into that process. Tortillas are a lot of fun to make in the winter. I just need to actually make tortillas in the winter so that I can enjoy the process more. They are delicious. They're good. I mean, like, lard-based tortillas are just so good. But I typically only make them in the summer. So I enjoy making them. I enjoy teaching people how to make them. I've taught a couple different people, and it was a fun process. But in the heat of the summer, over a hot skillet, it can be a bit much. So I've got about 4 cubes left of this butter. Plus, I mean, tortillas are more of a flatbread than a baked bread. I wouldn't consider naan to be a baked item, even though it is a flatbread. I haven't quite got the naan recipe done. But in terms of baked goods, yeah, like biscuits. I actually use, I think it's Sifton's recipe for biscuits from the New York Times. If you go to their cooking app, you can probably find the biscuit recipe. I do not use whole milk. I use buttermilk instead. I keep everything else about that recipe the same, but I use buttermilk. And I consistently find that outcome to be just, I really don't keep the biscuits around very long. They disappear very quickly. All right, so last cube of this ganache is going in, and I'm excited because in getting all this in, it's got this great consistency for pouring. And yeah, it does look like all the butter got incorporated. Some of you may be wondering, when does this cherry jelly come into play? Why did you ask me to buy this? And it's gonna come in right now, but not for the ganache. So I'm gonna show you a bit more closely the results of the bake from last night. Once I had safely put that aside, cleared my workspace. What happens in a vast majority of bakes is that you get these wonderful cracks on the top of the cake. And ganache is going to expose every single fault line. That is not the worst thing in the world. It's okay. This is a homemade cake. It is, again, meant to be given to those who are going through all this craziness with us. I am using the Bon Maman Cherry Reserves. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and apply jam directly to the top. What's important to note is whether or not your cherry mix is actually a jam, a preserve, a marmalade, or a jelly. This does have some bits of cherry in it, but I can also like smush those into the cracks, which just means my cherry devil's food cake is gonna have more cherries in it. Yes, please. And we are just gonna wanna go ahead and cover, maybe not that piece of cherry. Go ahead and cover the top of this cake and make it as smooth as possible. You can use an offset spatula for this. I just use a basic stainless steel dinner spatula or dinner knife. Gosh, if you had a stainless steel dinner spatula, I'd want to know what you were eating. But I'm just using a basic dinner knife. No big deal. I'm using the regular straight edge and not the serrated edge to smooth this out. Ideally, you could put this in the fridge overnight. Also, if you want, you could cut the cake in half, put cherry reserves in the middle, put it back on top. But we've already gone ahead and put whole cherries inside, so I don't think that's really necessary for this. Once you're done with the jam, go ahead, pop it in your fridge. I consistently find Bon Maman to have a really good flavor. And thankfully, the flavor of the cherry reserves, the preserves, is very, very similar to the sweet cherries that I requested you get from Whole Foods. That's the primary reason why I've gotten these two. It's because you want a consistency of flavor. If we were to use maraschino cherries for the interior, but then have like a really bright Smucker's cherry jelly on top, that'd be a whole lot of contrast. What we want is a consistent result. And we're gonna take the ganache. Maybe not the pinky test. We've got little people in the kitchen. What you can do is you take the end of your spoon, not the side you're actually gonna be using, but the end of your spoon, dip it in, and you wanna see how, I'll clean that up after this, how well it's coated that spoon. So long as it's got a nice sort of shiny film, you're good. Oh, wow, that's good. And you can taste the cherry in that. All right, so we are going, let's see. And it's about room temperature. You can keep this at room temperature for up to, I think, 3 days. I wouldn't. That's what Joy of Cooking says you can do. But the good news is, if you leave this out, if you do this before you even do the cake, just cover up in cling film, it'll be fine. I'm gonna just go ahead and make sure it's still completely mixed. I have put my cake on a Lazy Susan that has aluminum foil on top. So that enables me to go ahead, start from the middle. We're going to very slowly pour the ganache on top. Now you can go for different amounts of coverage. I like it just about fully covered. Oh, there's a bit of butter that didn't get mixed in completely, and that's okay. What's also really nice about this is if you have, somebody helping you in the kitchen, and they have to taste test this, you can put this directly into milk and make chocolate milk, or cherry chocolate milk, and that would be delicious. However, what I really enjoy drinking with this is something that I call the self-isolation. So while this cake cools, I'm going to curl up the edges of my foil so you don't have to worry about the ganache trying to escape. Because I'm also still working in a hot kitchen since the oven is still on, so this will stay pretty liquidy. While you make cherry chocolate cake for your little sous chef, the big chefs in the room might want to try something a little bit different. Something a little more 5 o'clock. So we're going to be making a self-isolation. From the leftovers of this process. So first, we're going to take about 2 or 3 of these leftover cherries, and we're plopping them in to a champagne flute. You're going to take 1 ounce of Aperol, and I had to keep a splash of cherry juice. This is maybe a 1/16 of a cup. I don't know exactly how many fluid ounces that is. We're going to add that in there. Give it a stir. Then we're going to add approximately 3 ounces of Prosecco. The people in New York City are very excited by the fact that liquor stores have stayed open the entire pandemic. And many liquor stores, provided you give them ID, will deliver to your doorstep. So my local store was very kind to help me get this. What is this? Familia Pasqua Prosecco. open. About 3 ounces. Now, if you want to fill it up completely, you do you. I'm not going to stop you. However, it is quite hot here today. Put my stopper in there. So I will be finishing this off with some club soda. I'm just going to top that off with club soda. All right. And that is a self-isolation. And overall, I think, pretty good cake. You have a cherry devil's food cake with a cherry chocolate glaze and an opportunity to cheer to yourself while in self-isolation. Thank you so much for joining us, you guys. I'm so happy you were able to come. I hope I haven't gone over time by too much, but I think I probably have. But thank you for staying.
No worries. Thank you so much, Catherine. We really appreciate it. And I think the extra time just to see the whole process and, of course, make that yummy cocktail is well worth it on a Friday afternoon. Just really quick, we will go ahead and wrap this up so everyone can get to maybe baking their cake or starting to eat their cake if they baked along with Catherine. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We hope you'll tune in for our upcoming programs. Just a quick reminder to check our Facebook, Instagram, and the alumni website for further information and to stay up to date on what's coming next. And if you'd like to host your own demo for fellow alums, please feel free to reach out via email or social media. And we hope to see you soon. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, go Spiders, and thanks again, Catherine, for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining me. Cheers. Have a good weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, eat some cake.
Have a good one. Thanks, everyone.